However, in North Africa, they still would have ended up encountering other people, namely Aterians, with whom they would have bred, thereby spawning a population that will be referred to as Ancestral North Africans. This population was conceptualized by geneticist Joseph Lazaridis, and he modeled them in Figure 2 of his non-peer-reviewed scientific article, Paleolithic DNA from the Caucasus Reveals Core of West Eurasian Ancestry, which was released in 2018. As can be seen, the branch that models their lineage stems from the point that corresponds to ancestral Northeast Africans, as do the branches that model the lineages of Aboriginal Africans, namely the Yoruba and Moda. Additionally, it splits from the branch that models the lineage of ancestral Eurasians. This indicates that ancestral North Africans would have been genetically intermediate between ancestral Eurasians and Aboriginal Africans. However, because they would have lacked the additional genetic drift that would have been unique to ancestral Eurasians and Eurasians of later times, they would have been most closely related to Aboriginal Africans. This can be demonstrated via the ancient hunter-gatherers of Taforalt, Morocco, because 45% of their ancestry is modeled as having derived from ancestral North Africans. Note that the other 55% is modeled as having derived from a Eurasian source, which would have been related to ancient people of Zudzuana, Georgia, who have been estimated to have lived 26,000 years ago. For convenience's sake, the ancient hunter-gatherers of Taforalt, Morocco will be referred to simply as the Taforalt hunter-gatherers from Iran. Vahaduo reveals that 36.6% to 42.4% of the ancestry that was carried by these hunter-gatherers is best modeled by Aboriginal Africans, apart from the 57.6% to 63.4% that's best modeled by Zudzuana. One of the two Aboriginal Africans who have been used is Moda, the aforementioned fossilized male who was discovered in Ethiopia and who has been estimated to have lived 4,500 years ago. Recall that he is most closely related to Aboriginal East Africans. The other Aboriginal African who has been used is KPL2, a fossilized female who was discovered in Kenya and who has been estimated to have lived approximately 300 years ago. She is most closely related to Niger-Congo peoples, particularly Bantus, which indicates that she herself was a Bantu. Note the distances between the models and the DNA samples of Taforalt hunter-gatherers are large. This is because ancestral North Africans would have comprised a distinct lineage relative to Aboriginal Africans who lived relatively recently, such as Moda or modern Aboriginal Africans, just as they comprise distinct lineages relative to each other. However, what matters is that Vahaduo selects such Aboriginal Africans to model the ancestry of the Taforalt hunter-gatherers that's hypothesized to have derived from ancestral North Africans. This indicates that ancestral North Africans would have been Aboriginal Africans themselves. Note that Figure 2 models the lineage of the Taforalt hunter-gatherers as having provided 13% of the ancestry in the Yoruba, who represent Niger-Congo peoples. This may create the impression that the ancestry in the Taforalt hunter-gatherers that's modeled by Niger-Congo peoples, such as KPL2 or the Yoruba themselves, may be ancestry that originated in the lineage of the Taforalt hunter-gatherers rather than vice versa. However, this is unlikely, because when only Moda is used to model ancestry in the Taforalt hunter-gatherers, the percentage that he models increases, to account for the percentage that would be modeled by Niger-Congo peoples. This is noteworthy, because Figure 2 does not model the lineage of the Taforalt hunter-gatherers as having provided any of the ancestry in Moda. Therefore, it's unlikely that Niger-Congo people carry ancestry that derived from the lineage of the Taforalt hunter-gatherers. Rather, they and the Taforalt hunter-gatherers likely share ancestry that derived from common ancestors who would have been ancestral Northeast Africans. This is reflected in Figure S 3.17. It models an ancestral Northeast African lineage as having split from another that produced ancestral Eurasians and Moda. It also models this lineage as having split afterwards into two lineages, one that's modeled as having produced the African lineage of the Taforalt hunter-gatherers, which would have been the lineage of ancestral North Africans, and another that's modeled as having mixed with the ghost modern population and the ghost archaic source, thereby creating ancestral Niger-Congo peoples. This indicates that the Taforalt hunter-gatherers shared genetic drift with ancestral Niger-Congo peoples that they didn't share with ancestral Eurasians or Moda. The Taforalt hunter-gatherers carried maternal haplogroups U6A and M1B, and paternal haplogroup EM78, according to the peer-reviewed scientific article, Pleistocene North African Genomes Linked Near Eastern and Sub-Saharan African Human Populations, which was published in 2018. Mitochondrial consensus sequences of the Taforalt individuals belong to the U6A, 6 individuals, and M1B, 1 individual, haplogroups. End quote. We present genome-wide data from 7 individuals from Grotte de Pigeons near Taforalt in eastern Morocco, which were directly dated between 15,100 and 13,900 calibrated years before present. Consistently, we find that all males with sufficient nuclear DNA preservation carry Y haplogroup E1b1b1AE1, which is otherwise referred to as EM78. This haplogroup occurs most frequently in present-day North and East African populations. End quote. U6A and M1B are Eurasian maternal haplogroups. Therefore, the Taforalt hunter-gatherers must have inherited or derived them via the 55% of their ancestry that's modeled as having derived from a Sub-saharan-related source. Due to the obvious Eurasian origin of the Taforalt hunter-gatherers' maternal haplogroups, they most likely inherited or derived their paternal haplogroup, EM78, from their non-Eurasian source of ancestry, namely the 45% of their ancestry that's modeled as having derived from Ancestral North Africans. This indicates that throughout their existence, Ancestral North Africans would have carried subclades of paternal haplogroup E that would have been ancestors of EM78. This is consistent with this presentation's conclusion that Ancestral North Africans would have carried EP2 and EM215 because they are precursors of EM78. Additionally, this indicates that Ancestral North Africans or earlier descendants of theirs who would have been partly Eurasian like the Taforalt hunter-gatherers, would have carried EM35 and EL539. As can be inferred from the figure, Ancestral North Africans would have existed as a distinct group until the time that they would have engaged in an admixture event with the Sub-saharan-related source, via which they would have spawned the Eurasian admixed lineage of the Taforalt hunter-gatherers. Therefore, the date of this event would have determined which ancestor of EM78 would have been carried by the last generations of Ancestral North Africans and which one would have been carried by the first generations of their partly Eurasian descendants. The date would have corresponded to the arrival of the Taforalt hunter-gatherers' maternal ancestors in North Africa, which can be inferred based on another quote from the article that has been cited herein most recently. Notably, the diversification of haplogroups U6A and M1 found for Taforalt is dated to approximately 24,000 years before present, which is close in time to the earliest known appearance of the Iberomaurusian culture in Northwest Africa, which was 25,845 to 25,270 calibrated years before present at Tamar Het. End quote. Note that practitioners of the Iberomaurusian stone tool culture, who included the Taforalt hunter-gatherers, are referred to as Iberomaurusians. Therefore, the Taforalt hunter-gatherers may also be referred to as the Iberomaurusians of Taforalt. The emergence of the Iberomaurusian stone tool culture in North Africa would have most likely corresponded to the arrival of new people. Therefore, based on the quote, the arrival of Eurasians in North Africa would have been 25,845 to 25,270 calibrated years before present. Additionally, there is no logical reason why they and Ancestral North Africans would have delayed breeding with one another for centuries or millennia after the former's arrival in the region. According to Y. Tree, one of the two most downstream ancestors of EM78 that could have existed during this range of time is EM35. The other is one of EM35's two direct subclades, namely EL539, based on the temporal range that spans from the earliest to the latest estimative date for its formation. Accordingly, EM35 would have been carried by the last generations of Ancestral North Africans and the first generations of Iberomaurusians, and among Iberomaurusians, it would have developed into EL539, which, in turn, would have developed into EM78. In addition to developing into EL539, EM35 developed into EZ827. In turn, EZ827 developed into EZ830, which was carried by an ancient Levantine population that's referred to as the Natufians. As can be seen, the majority of the Natufians' ancestry can be modeled by Zudzuana. However, part of their ancestry can be modeled by the Taforalt hunter-gatherers. Accordingly, part of the Taforalt hunter-gatherers' ancestry can be modeled by the Natufians. This presents a mystery regarding the direction of gene flow between the Taforalt hunter-gatherers and the Natufians. Recall the aforementioned evidence that the Iberomaurusian stone tool culture formed in North Africa approximately 25,000 years ago. This predates evidence that the Natufian culture formed in the Levant approximately 14,500 years ago, according to Table 2 of the article, Small Game, the Younger Dreyas, and the Transition to Agriculture in the Southern Levant, which was published in 2003. Recall also the conclusion of this presentation that North Africa was the birthplace of EM35, which is ancestral to the Natufians' paternal haplogroup, EZ830. All of this information indicates that Iberomaurusian ancestry, which would have included a subclade of EM35, namely EZ827, introgressed from North Africa into Zudzuana-related people who inhabited the Levant, thereby creating the Natufians, and that afterwards, EZ827 developed into EZ830 among the Natufians. A quote from the most previously cited article pertains to the overlapping ancestry of the Taforalt hunter-gatherers and the Natufians. The genetic profile of Taforalt suggests substantial Natufian-related and Sub-Saharan African-related ancestries, 63.5% and 36.5%, respectively, but not additional ancestry from Epigravidian or other Upper Paleolithic European populations. End quote. The model of the ancestry in the Taforalt hunter-gatherers that's presented in this article will be referred to as Loosdrecht's model, because Marika van de Loosdrecht is the main author of the article from which the quote has been cited. And this model will be compared to those that are presented in Figure 2 and Figure S3.17, which will be referred to as Lazaridis' model and Lipson's model, respectively, because Joseph Lazaridis and Mark Lipson, respectively, are the main authors of the articles that include these figures. The comparison will reveal how much of the ancestries in the Taforalt hunter-gatherers and the Natufians derived from Eurasians, and how much derived from the source that's hypothesized to have been ancestral North Africans. Once again, Lazaridis models 55% of the ancestry in the Taforalt hunter-gatherers as having derived from a Zudzuana-related Eurasian source, and the other 45% as having derived from ancestral North Africans. Contrastingly, Lipson models 46% of the ancestry in them as having derived from a Eurasian source, and the other 54% as having derived from ancestral North Africans. As can be seen, the majority of the Natufians' ancestry can be modeled by the ancient Eurasians of Zudzuana, Georgia. However, a large minority of their ancestry can be modeled by the Taforalt hunter-gatherers, which indicates that it's Iberomaurusian. Therefore, the Natufian component of Loosdrecht's model presumably contains both unadmixed, Zudzuana-related Eurasian ancestry as well as Iberomaurusian ancestry. Subsequently, the differences between the Natufian component of Loosdrecht's model and the Eurasian component of Lazaridis' model or the Eurasian component of Lipson's model should be Iberomaurusian ancestry. These differences are 8.5% and 17.5%, with which Loosdrecht's model can be re-expressed as shown. To determine which re-expression is more accurate, consider the percentage of Loosdrecht's model that's comprised of Natufian ancestry, that is to say 63.5%. Recall that Iberomaurusian ancestry is a mixture of Zudzuana-related Eurasian ancestry and ancestral North African ancestry. However, given that the re-expressions already account for the Taforalt hunter-gatherers' Eurasian ancestry, the Iberomaurusian components of the re-expressions should be comprised of only ancestral North African ancestry. Therefore, a proportional 63.5% of the Natufians' Iberomaurusian ancestry should be approximately equal to the ancestral North African ancestry that's in the re-expressions. As can be seen, Vahaduo uses the Taforalt hunter-gatherers to model 28.6% to 30% of the Natufians' ancestry. The average of these percentages is 29.3%, 63.5% of which is 18.6%. This is much closer to 17.5% than it is to 8.5%. Therefore, the second re-expression is more accurate than the first one, which indicates that Lipson's model is more accurate than that of Lazaridis. Note that the 36.5% Sub-Saharan African component of Loosdrecht's model should account for one component of Ancestral North African ancestry, namely Ancestral Northeast African ancestry. This is because it's nearly equal to the 36.6% to 42.4% of the ancestry in the Taforalt hunter-gatherers that can be modeled by MOTA and KPL2, who are proxies for what would be Ancestral Northeast African ancestry due to reasons that will be explained herein shortly. Therefore, the 17.5% ancestry in the Natufian component should account for the other component of Ancestral North African ancestry, namely Aterian ancestry. Subsequently, according to Loosdrecht's model in combination with Lipson's model and conclusions that have been made herein, the Taforalt hunter-gatherers were 46% Eurasian, 17.5% Aterian, and 36.5% Ancestral Northeast African, on average. This raises the question, why does Vahaduo model the Taforalt hunter-gatherers as predominantly Zulu-Zwana related if they were predominantly Ancestral North African? The answer may be the 8 units of genetic drift that Lazaridis models Ancestral North Africans as having shared with Eurasians, but not with the Ancestral Northeast African lineages that are modeled as having produced the Yoruba and Mota. For example, Vahaduo selects even ancient Eurasians, such as Zlati Kun and Ustashim Man, to model the majority of the ancestry in the Taforalt hunter-gatherers. Zlati Kun was a female anatomically modern human, whose skull and some of whose other bones were discovered in the Konepersy caves of the Czech Republic, and who's been estimated to have lived more than 45,000 years ago. And Ustashim Man was a male anatomically modern human, whose femur was discovered in the Siberian portion of Russia, and who's been estimated to have lived 45,000 years ago. However, if this shared genetic drift is real, there appears to be a negative correlation between the percentage of it that's been retained by modern Eurasians and their geographic distance from Africa. The farther from Africa that a Eurasian population is, the less of the Taforalt hunter-gatherers' ancestry that Vahaduo selects them to model when they are paired with an aboriginal African population.